The cloud. Fantastic. Alrighty, so I am so privileged to be speaking with Aryenish Birdie, the founder and executive director of Encompass Movement. And I don't want to give a description because I want to leave that to you. Would you love to just dive in and start by telling us about your inspiration and the mission at Encompass?
Yeah. So we work to foster racial diversity, equity, inclusion at all levels of the farm animal protection movement. So that's this portion of the animal protection movement that focuses on supporting farmed animals. And that's where we have a lot of ripe overlap with Plant Burger. We are looking to bring people of color into our movement, elevate them up into leadership roles, and make sure that there's a culture of equity that's baked into everything we do. And as a woman of color myself, this is definitely an organization I needed and currently need. And so I kind of created it out of looking at myself and having conversations with advocates of color all over the country, in all various sectors of the movement. And yeah, so we exist today to serve both advocates of color and organizations that are predominantly white, run, and led, better embody this spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically as it relates to race equity.
Phenomenal. And this isn't as much related to the Save the Planet series, but given that it is International Women's Month, would you like to share some of your views on, maybe your experience and the challenges, some of the biggest challenges that you see facing women or marginalized communities today?
Oh my gosh, yeah, where do I start? And there's so many women, powerful women talking about this at all layers and levels in society and in our movement. All of our subcultures that we create, all these sub movements are a product of society at large, because we are, a product of society at large, even if we eat predominantly plant-based, if we, however we identify, we are living at various unique intersections. And so I definitely have experienced challenges ranging from as benign as just a lack of understanding of how, my being a woman impacts my advocacy, my views, my being a person of color affects my advocacy, my views, to hearing racial slurs used against me and my colleagues, and then also the structural barriers that are there at all levels. And so I think something that we're starting to see more of in society is an understanding that race and racism, gender and sexism are all really baked into so much of what we see and do in society. And in order to upend one ism, we are upending multiple isms, and that we have to do those simultaneously. And so I view my fight for animals and for the earth and for myself as a woman and other parts of my identity as integrated with other parts of the social justice fight for those who that maybe I don't identify with, such as trans folks, or the people with disabilities. I think all of our liberation is bound up with one another. And so we're trying to I think it's really important to try to land on that at all times.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's this intersectionality that needs to be acknowledged in order to effectively combat systems of oppression. And just on one more note on International Women's Rights and Women's Month, do you have any advice for young women who are interested in activism, entrepreneurship, business? What would you say to people who are maybe like you before you got into the world of what you're doing today?
I would say definitely don't let fear hold you back. Don't let the workload hold you back. Don't let anything that anyone says hold you back. If you have a passion, if you have a vision, go for it full steam. Even if you don't have all of it organized in your mind, if you don't have all the steps clarified of how you're going to get from point A to point Z, it's okay. I would say jump in. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. That's something that I definitely struggle with is I want everything to be done the right way in a very, very particular way. And if it doesn't, then that means I have failed or something to that effect. But I would say just keep striving to go forward, even if it's not how you pictured it. Even if you can't picture it, I think you just have to kind of keep striving as much as possible. Don't let anything hold you back, even your own mind.
That's powerful. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, so as we go forth into April, which is Earth Month, I know you and I probably think of Earth Month as an ongoing existential factor in our lives. And so it may be difficult for us to actually make a distinction between the rest of the year and Earth Month. But starting from start, what was the moment of inspiration that really pushed you to create and found Encompass?
Hmm. I never really know how to answer this question because it's like an onion, you can go back so many layers. We're working on a book of essays right now, and I've been writing about this very thing. So I've been thinking about it even more than normal. Um, I I think if we have time, I'll start at the very beginning, which is that my parents fell in love in Pakistan, taking care of stray dogs on the streets in their neighborhood, and that deep love of animals was something that was just really rich inside them, and they don't really know why because they didn't have that modeled for them elsewhere, but that was something that they very much connected on. And so when they came to the United States, they raised my sister and me to understand and view animals as friends, as more than just beings who are here to serve humans however we desire, that they have intrinsic worth and value. Um, but we had a level of dissonance in that we did eat animals every day. And so I grew up knowing that foie gras and veal were products of immense cruelty. And for those of you who don't know, they are products of immense cruelty. And I think most people now know that that's kind of a thing in our society, that we understand that. Yet the ways in which animals on factory farms live, if these were done to dogs or cats, they would be felony charges. And so from the animal side of my journey, and that half of what Encompass is, that took me, I would say I was 12 before I started to understand how that came to be. And I was actually presented with the frog dissection project in my 7th grade biology class. And my mom was very opposed to my participation in that. And I was more so curious by her reaction because I'd never seen her speak so passionately about something. And so I reached out to a lot of the big animal protection groups. And this was back before email. This was in 97. And so I got a bunch of just leaflets in the mail, and I learned how animals are used and abused in society. And once I saw that, I was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. I'm fighting for animals who live behind closed doors. And really from then, it's been just kind of nonstop ever since. My awakening to my racial identity was a little bit different in that um, I was born and raised in Kansas in cattle country, and didn't, but I lived in a liberal town, and I didn't really experience a lot of overt racial aggression or bias, largely because I have a lot of light skin privilege. I don't have an accent, or I have an American accent, the kind of classic non-accent accent. And I was around people who kind of had that colorblind approach to racism. And so we just didn't talk about race at all. But I did experience microaggressions. I've been constantly asked, what are you, or where are you from? My whole life, like when I was younger, just like almost 2, 3 times a week. Almost every person I met asked me that. And then when 9/11 happened, things definitely ratcheted up a notch. And that's when some of the more overt racial slurs were used against me and that kind of thing, when there was this anti-brown sentiment. And so all of those things kind of came together for me in this very unique moment. And when I was in college, I'd spend a lot of time doing critical race theory, critical gender theory, looking at how these things kind of live theoretically, but then also inside bodies. And with all of this, I just kind of have been thinking, how do I talk about race in the context of animal advocacy? How do we have these conversations simultaneously? Because animal advocacy is really where I live. But as a woman of color, as a first generation person, and even as a queer person, I have a lot of parts of my own identity that live on the margins, and I haven't felt totally like I belong in this movement. But I definitely didn't want other people to feel that way. So I created Encompass, like I said earlier, as a place where we can have these conversations, where we can envision what a movement looks like, where we can think about how to make this the biggest, brightest, most powerful movement possible, and all of our and with an understanding that all of our liberations are bound up with one another, and to move forward collectively. So with all of that, I started Encompass, and we're 3.5 years old now.
That's incredible. Can you share some of the work that you've done at Encompass, some of the most like impactful stories or case studies that you feel are indicative of that intersectionality?
Yeah, so let me share a little bit about what we do. We kind of work on two core levels, like I mentioned earlier. One, we work specifically with advocates of color. Advocates of the global majority is the term we use because we try to be as globally inclusive in our scope. So we have a talent database for folks who are interested, and anyone who's listening is welcome to join, where we try to kind of connect people of color with opportunities. A lot of the barrier to entry is just how segregated our society is still, and not having an understanding of how to get into board roles, or how to get into staff roles, or how to get into speaking roles. And so we're trying to serve as kind of a bridge in that way. We also try to work to build community. Something that we hear a lot is this feeling of isolation, even pre-pandemic. And so we try to build community that way. So we have a lot of just kind of open-ended conversation and space where we connect kind of heart to heart. And yeah, we have a caucus, which is a space where basically we can kind of serve and support one another. So we have a Slack space for people all over the world to kind of stay connected. Connection is really something we're really striving for. And then the other side of the organization is we're working in kind of a consulting capacity to support white run and led organizations understand what equity looks like, where their culture may be falling short, where they can advance their policies to be better representative of their actual values, better understand, how to make the things that they want to be come to life. Because a lot of this is unlearning, and there is not a very clear sense of what it looks like to take a step from we're a predominantly white run organization to bringing more people of color in and moving them up into leadership roles. So in terms of case studies, there have been a few that I'm really proud of. There was a woman of color who joined our caucus early on. She felt quite alienated. She was working in an animal protection group and felt like she wanted to leave, so she quit, but stayed connected to our caucus and got a job elsewhere outside of the animal movement. I don't know exactly. And once she saw a role open up, an executive director role, she applied for it, and she ended up getting it. And so she's now an ED at a small nonprofit that works on animal protection issues. And she has told me personally that it was because of her feeling connected to the animal movement through the caucus, even during this period of kind of space, that allowed her to even kind of be open mentally to applying for another role in the movement. And so I'm really proud. That's probably like one of my most shining moments. And just feeling so proud of her and proud of this organization for creating that kind of space. Countless people who go through our trainings, white people who go through our trainings, have cited Encompass and our work as kind of a massive opening up for them in their own hearts for bringing racial equity work, racial justice work into their lives, into the conversations they have with their families, into their work. And I think that kind of quiet trickling of constant forward motion is actually what's going to make the biggest change. The things that aren't the flashiest, but it's having the conversations, having the internal introspection, having the late night, mulling something over with a family member or a friend that will advance this cause. And so I think fortunately I've been able to see, and I've gotten validation on both sides, that there are the big things that people have actually been able to advance themselves and advance our movement. And our movement is better when we have more diverse leadership. And also kind of at the small, very individual personal level where that commitment is made, and the and that desire to do right by all really gets entrenched. And I think both of those are equally as important.
Yeah, that's certainly incredibly important work, and it resonates with me as well because uh, I got into the animal liberation movement as a 10-year-old when I visited an animal sanctuary, and I was kind of faced with that same cognitive dissonance. Like, on one hand, I love animals. On the other hand, I and everyone around me is eating animal flesh, and that sort of got me interested in learning more. And the more I learned, the more I realized this really powerful and fundamental truth, which is that our equality and liberation and actualization um, as a just civilization is also wrapped up in how we treat creatures that we may be controlling or deemed higher on the food chain. I think that as animal liberation advocates, we also have maybe a deeper understanding. But would you mind just breaking down for people why those are wrapped up in each other? Why animal liberation and human rights and equality and social justice are, in fact, when we're talking about transitioning towards a plant-based diet, or trying to help more people to acknowledge that animal rights matter. Why is that wrapped up in human rights?
Yeah, I think it comes from that same plate. The oppression and marginalization comes from this of one group, whatever that group is, and the group could even be the earth. Um, Comes from that same place of kind of human supremacy, or anthropocentrism, which is this idea that everything is here for our whatever the dominant group is per use. And so there's a lot of really good scholarship. AFCO is a Black liberation scholar who is vegan, plant-based, and talks about these things. I would highly recommend any of her books. And she talks a lot about she says anti-Blackness came out of all humans, the humans' desire to kind of rule over non-humans, and anti-Blackness come from that same place. And we can't expect to have a world in which everything is perfect for animals where humans are still oppressed, and vice versa. It's just not going to happen, because the same place inside our brains that thinks we can control and manipulate and not deem their needs as valuable, you can't unpack those. And so the group that gets marginalized may change and does change, but that core sentiment is what really leads to marginalization. And so I think it's really important for us to challenge that at all levels and all layers.
Absolutely. Yes, it's certainly something that I observed the more I delved into learning about animal agricultures. It comes from the same paradigm that there's a domineering, pejorative way that we look at resources, the environment, animals, and then, of course, this is how so many human rights violations occur, is because one group assumes superiority over another and oppresses them. So I think that's a really profound insight, and one that certainly needs to be included in the conversation around animal rights and human rights, environmentalism. It's really all one and the same. It's having a more holistic approach to how can we embrace our existence on this planet as interwoven with environmental health, animal health. And until we really can perceive that and be proactive in building systems that respect ecology and the dignity of all life on Earth, I think we're going to be trapped in that harmful and maybe exploitive approach to our lives and to our system. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, we talk at Encompass a lot about the four eyes of oppression, which is a kind of a more theoretical way of looking at this, but the four eyes are ideological. So what are the ideas that we believe? Institutional, how do those ideas get lodged in institutions? Interpersonal, which is how do those ideas get lodged in our one-on-one interactions or group interactions, and then internalized? How do we, especially as marginalized people, then believe that and perpetuate it against each other? And I think that, and so we use it a lot in the context of race, because that's a very easy paradigm to see, but it can be used to express any oppression or marginalization. And so I think once we kind of can understand how these things come to be and come to live, it's easier to break it down. And so right now we're having, especially in society, we're having this big reckoning over institutional racism. Whereas previously we really only talked about racism in the interpersonal way. I didn't vote for that person, or I didn't say this one thing, so I'm not a racist. Where we're now understanding that actually racism is much bigger, and that it lives in these very covert ways, and it lives in all these different places, and we're kind of unpacking. I think that's a really good thing for society to be doing right now.
Totally. Yeah. And so through these conversations, it occurs to me now that we're actually, through this series, the Save the Planet series, are trying to raise awareness in a way that's quite similar to Encompass. We're really trying to gather perspectives from people of all different walks of life and different sectors of activism, whether they be conservationists, entrepreneurs, people who are involved in the nonprofit arena. And we want to use these conversations to provide people, no matter where they are in their life's journey, no matter where they are geographically, to have resources and to have concrete action items that they can look at and be empowered to take action in the movement to save the planet. What are your thoughts on the climate crisis right now that we all face?
It's probably the biggest existential threat of humanity. And pretty much everything else that everyone is doing is meaningless unless we really substantially take that on. And we know how much factory farming contributes to that. The UN has put out so many reports talking about greenhouse gas emissions, in fact, and the connection between that and factory farming, how harmful that industry, animal agriculture, is, especially as contrasted with the oil and gas industry and others. So I think it's massive. Encompass sits on a coalition called 50 by 40, which is a organization that's working to reduce the meat consumption by 50% by 2040. It's a very international coalition, and they're doing this for the climate. They're talking about this primarily from a climate standpoint. So it's something that we're, even though Encompass really works at this particular intersection of race and animal advocacy, we think that the climate change is just so important that we have to dedicate some time and resources to talking about and addressing that as well.
Yeah, I think it was really shocking to me because, as you heard earlier, I kind of got into vegetarianism when I was really young, and now veganism, and I pushed my whole family and like friend group off of the cliff and into the world of plant-based living. And then it wasn't until later that I kind of understood the environmental impacts, the health impacts, the societal impacts. And so this is something that, again, as you said, so many publications and international watchdog groups have identified as one of the major contributors to climate change, a massive source of greenhouse gases, the leading cause of deforestation. And so you can come at it from different angles. And there's a lot of reasons to embrace plant-based food. And as I conceptualize like my work and mission and the Plant Burger mission to eat the change you wish to see in the world, that's something that, I think we all take pride in, and everyone who's involved in this enterprise is really excited to see and empower people. Like, this is a small everyday thing that you can do to really have a big impact, and reduce your carbon footprint and feel good and do positive things for others, other creatures and other humans in the supply chain.
Yeah.
What is, maybe if you had to think back in your career, an environmental action that you've taken or that you've helped someone else take that has been most meaningful to you?
I think for me, honestly, it's committing to a completely plant-based diet. I've been vegan for, oh my gosh, 20 years. This,
Wow.
yeah, this
Congratulations.
season. Thank you. I did it slowly, but it was 2001. And having compassionate conversations with other people about doing that. I similarly had a moment when I was younger where it was just like, go vegan. And I think a lot of vegans get that, have the stereotype of being that way. But I think it's really important to recognize that every time you make a decision to eat a single meal that's plant-based, you are taking meaningful steps to addressing this. And so even if you're doing it one day a week, one meal a week, there are so many different ways to slice and dice how you take dietary change. If you come to it from some semblance of intentionality for your own health, for the workers who are in absolutely wretched situations in meatpacking plants and processing plants, for the environment, for the female animals who are disproportionately targeted. Most farmed animals people don't know are female bodies that get exploited. There are so many ways to come at this issue, and it permeates us in such a deep way because we eat so many times a day, that for me personally, the most meaningful thing, I have done is adopt a plant-based diet. I do also, I am child-free by choice, and I think that there's a lot of discussion around the environmental impacts of humans on this earth, and so that is one of my considerations. But I would say more than anything else, it's choosing to be plant-based and encouraging others in as soft and gentle way as possible to eat that way as well.
And uplifting and delicious, ideally.
Yes, exactly. Especially now. I mean, when I went vegan, there was like one kind of soy milk. There was like burgers that you had to add water to, and now we have Beyond Burger and like Follow Your Heart cheese and Just Egg and like all these things. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. And burgers and steak has always been my food of preference. And so it was certainly a massive sacrifice when I was younger to give all that up. And I feel so lucky that I live in a day and age where we witness the explosive growth in food technology and plant-based meats really achieving this super high level of replicating that same experience, and the flavors we know and love, the comfort foods that we always
absolutely.
So I would agree. I would say that's a wonderful feeling and a wonderful way to be active and actuating your beliefs and having impact simply through what you put into your body. And that intention cannot be understated.
Absolutely.
What else on a systemic level do you think needs to happen in order to facilitate the evolution of economic systems, agricultural systems that help the planet and help people?
I really believe in the value and benefit of plant-based technology. I'm also really interested in cellular agriculture, which is kind of commonly known as lab-grown meat. We call it cultivated meat or cellular agriculture because it's really taking those cells and creating something, without needing to slaughter an animal. And some people kind of turn their nose up at it, but every single person eats something grown in a lab every day. Cheerios is grown in a lab. And so I think there's really, not grown, it's produced in a lab, I should say. And so I think that there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of potential technology, and I feel really optimistic about that. I mean, just seeing what we see with, we have a burger that bleeds now, like we have meat that actually has to be cooked, not just reheated. Those are really powerful things that we're using, plants to make. And I think that's really, really powerful. So I'm really optimistic and hopeful of that. In terms of what needs to be changed at a systemic level, the cost of meat currently is artificially low, largely due to government subsidies. And I think that really needs to change. The true cost of a cow based burger is way higher than what people are actually paying for it, all animal products. And so I think that's one thing, at least, that I think is really important. And unfortunately, it won't happen because the meat lobby is extremely, extremely powerful and well funded. And I think, I honestly think that probably our greatest path forward is the continual advancement of plant-based technology and cellular agriculture.
I agree. I think that's certainly the way forward. And as to your point, the meat and dairy industry, and the meat and dairy lobby is one of the most well endowed and powerful lobbies in America, but also it has ramifications worldwide.
Yep.
And just changing not only the financial support that these industries receive, but also addressing the misinformation and re-educating people about the lies that have been perpetuated by the meat and dairy industry as it relates to human health is another really powerful way that we can empower people and inspire them to make choices that are simultaneously better for their personal health, better for animal well-being and the environment, and the struggles of the underprivileged or marginalized communities that are most severely impacted through production of and processing of these animal products. So I'm really optimistic about it. And the work that you do, Aryenish, is so important and essential in creating that world that we are all striving for. And so we all owe you a huge debt of gratitude. Thank you so, so much for everything you do and for joining us for our Save the Planet series. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Anything else that you want to mention before we sign off?
No, I just would say the same thing to you. Thank you for doing what you're doing and trying to get, take a very multi-dimensional approach to looking at these issues, trying to look at communities that have historically been marginalized and offering different kinds of options. I think all of that is so important. So I'm just really grateful for it. And if you're interested in any of our work, definitely check out encompassmovement.org.
Phenomenal. And other ways that people can support your work, it's all on the website, I suppose?
Yeah, it's all on the website. We're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Encompass MVMT, short for movement.
Lovely. Fantastic. Thank you so, so much, and have a wonderful day. I look forward to enjoying some plant egg sammies with you soon.
Yes, my favorite. Thank you.
Thank you so much.